We have to.
Ready to go?
Yours?
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the third of 4 budget presentations. I'm wondering if Kim McKechnie is holding the rest of the crowd in another room. But thank you very much for coming.
What time is it?
So we're going to cover some material today, but we've also put up some slides asking for your advice and feedback on ways in which we can work on the budget collectively. So we've got some ideas on some of the slides, and we would be very happy to hear your response to them. As with previous presentations, if you're not here, and it's kind of silly me saying that because you're here, but you can certainly view this presentation on video at the address given above. And the fact that you're here, we're assuming that is consent, should any questions be asked and responses given. So with that, welcome. And my esteemed colleagues will take over from here.
So just a little bit of recap and things, in case you weren't at the last presentation. It is online. You can, it's good nighttime watching and viewing. But some of the things we talked about there, and we'd be glad to elaborate further on any one of them if questions come up on it. We're not going to produce a whole bunch of new charts and things like that because we don't have, nothing new has transpired. We're still waiting. In fact, there'll be a slide on the budget. But last time, the main emphasis of the presentation was, as you know, those that were here, which is probably most of you, was we walked through all of the many different online bits of budget information and where they are and where they can be found. We talked about student recruitment and retention. We talked about the challenge and the gaps between U of R and U of S. Some of these were in the base presentation, by the way, and others of them came in the Q&A period afterwards. The president actually had their own forum that really focused on the economic impact of U of R as well. We talked a little bit about it. She talked a lot about it. There was questions about pension that answered. There may be more questions. We'd be glad to answer them. Then there was some a couple questions in back and forth on reserved and special purpose funds. We've reviewed the tapes again just to check and see was it thorough, was it correct, and confirmed that it was. And we've had follow-up discussions on those as we invited the questioner and things to do, as well as some of these discussions extensively at CCB as well. But we'd be glad to do them again, do them as many times as necessary so that people truly understand them. A little bit about the schedule and things like that. Most of this won't be new to many of you, but we normally get a provincial budget in March. This year it's been delayed because of the election. We thought it would be late May. Most of the hints now, the interviews after the election, the Minister of Finance, the Premier, both indicating late May, early June. Who knows exactly how far into June it'll take. On that day, our practice is that they normally provide us with our budget letter, so we're expecting that to continue, that whatever day the budget is, we'll find out what our university budget is. We normally take 6-7 weeks to then turn that around and produce a university budget. We're going to try and do that much, much quicker. So we're hoping that in a couple of weeks after us getting our budget letter, we'll be able to have a budget out that may well require a special board meeting for the Board of Governors to be able to take and approve it. If it's delayed beyond mid-June or so, we have got a regular board meeting scheduled early July. We'd probably wait till early July. So some people, and we'll get then budget letters out typically a couple weeks after the board decision item, and once it's approved. So a lot of the questions would be, okay, well, how can we possibly operate without a budget when the new fiscal year has started? Well, every year we tend to not have the budget letters out until after the fiscal year has started. Our fiscal year is 1st of May, and typically you'd get budget letters in the faculty about the third week or so of May. So this year we'll be a little bit deeper into it. That's not a legal issue or a financial issue at all, but we would just caution people to carry on with spending and plans, but be careful in doing that over that period. But our experience is that's exactly what people have been doing anyway. They've been quite conservative and cautious, knowing that the budget gets more and more challenging each year. So that's the schedule. What we're looking for today, and we've got a couple more slides, so it's not quite into the, feel free to ask questions, but we're going to talk over a couple of topical issues to just stimulate some thought, and then perhaps a list of different areas. We're going to do it in two different parts. First of all, one on basically the operating budget, because that's mainly what we would normally be talking about this time and what the biggest concern is. But there's also a special opportunity in the federal government's announcement about infrastructure money and the special investment fund or strategic investment fund. And so we'll do it in two parts. We'll go through a little bit on operating budget, and then we'll restart, talk a little bit about infrastructure funding to get your advice on that as well. So there's two different parts that we are seeking your advice.
So those of you who've been to previous sessions know that a generation ago, the amount of money into the operating budget contributed by students via tuition and fees was 20-25%, relatively low. We're up now to about 36% of the operating budget coming in via tuition and fees. And the long and the short of it is we, like all Canadian universities, are becoming more, not less sensitive to student enrollment and to retention of students in order to pay the bills, in order to pay salaries and benefits of faculty and staff. So our general increase in the past 2 years, 3.8% annually. There's a lot of misleading information, some of which cropped up in the recent provincial election campaign, part of it because of the way that Stats Canada reports out on tuition increases in tuition from province to province. The truth of the matter is that of the 59 English language Canadian universities, and we say English language because the Quebec universities operate on a very different regime and a very different business model, but of the 59 Canadian English language, we are the 18th lowest for art students, and the rest is within a fairly narrow band. We charge more tuition to students in engineering and in business, but it's not a huge premium. So the U of R remains among the most affordable English language Canadian universities there are. And the confusion around Stats Canada figures, which annually report that Saskatchewan tuition has gone up the second highest in the country or is the second highest in the country, has to do with they're not reporting the total bottom line, which is tuition and fees, what students actually have to pay. They report only tuition, and the Saskatchewan figures are skewed because of a number of high-cost programs that are counted as undergraduate programs at the University of Saskatchewan, chief among them medicine. So medical tuition pulls up the average for Saskatchewan. The key thing to remember here is that we are comparatively affordable in the Canadian English language context. I think everybody in the room too is aware that international undergraduate students pay 3 times as much. The logic for that is quite simple. For a domestic student whose parents and grandparents and family have contributed to the tax base for years, the government effectively covers almost 2/3 of the cost of their education via the operating grant, and the student or his or her family pays 1/3. For international students who haven't made that contribution over the years through their family and their ancestors to the tax base, they pay effectively the full cost of the education, hence the 3x. We don't do that at the graduate level. Rather, international graduate students pay the same tuition, but there is a fee of $1,000 for international graduate students on top of the tuition. So in putting the budget together, and this is one of the things we want to hear your advice about today, if we put tuition up by 1 percentage point, it earns us roughly another $750,000. So if you translate that into jobs, depending on CUPE jobs, APT jobs, faculty jobs, you can do a quick calculation in your mind of roughly how many jobs that means for the university, or our ability then to fund other things such as deferred maintenance, equipment purchase, and other things like that. The University of Saskatchewan announces its tuition increases much earlier than we do, and they've announced a range of 0 to 5% increases with the average of about 2.5. So again, your thoughts in the context of Saskatchewan, if the University of Saskatchewan's average is 2.5, we've built into our operations forecast a 3.8% average tuition increase. Is that appropriate? Or should we think of some other tuition increase, whatever that number should be? Bear in mind that the University of Saskatchewan is less dependent on tuition and fees than we are. So that tuition and fee revenue is more important to the University of Regina to balance our budget than it is for the University of Saskatchewan. The government's imposed a tuition freeze in Alberta. Alberta, as you know, tends to go like this in terms of economic cycles, and right now they're in that tuition freeze. So we're competing for students increasingly in Ontario. Does putting tuition up make us less competitive for the students we want to gain from markets such as Lethbridge, southeastern Alberta, and Calgary? If you've been through the airport in Calgary in the last few weeks, you would almost be forgiven for thinking that you're in Regina Airport. There are so many ads in there for the University of Regina. Finally, just helping you prompt your thoughts here, the CUSC survey, the Canadian University Survey Consortium data, tell us, and our students respond, this is from the students themselves, that 1/2 of our undergraduates leaving the university with degrees graduate with no debt at all. Now, the other half have debt, and some of them have considerable debt, which is in part caused by tuition costs, but half of our students graduate with no debt at all. How should that factor into our thinking about tuition? And then just a couple of quick points about recruitment and enrollments. We have been increasing steadily over about the last 5 or 6 years. The university went into a decline in enrollments and credit hours in about 2004, and that decline lasted until about 2008, 2009. It then began to uptick. And as I think everybody knows, we're now at our highest level ever of enrollments. This past fall, about 14,300 students by head count. We think we may be above 14,500 this fall, thanks to hard work on the part of many people in the room, and thanks also to a better rate of student retention. If you look at the way that international enrollments have increased, the numbers are up there. What is the appropriate balance campus-wide for international versus domestic? And what are the appropriate targets, faculty by faculty, or even program by program, given that international enrollments tend to cluster in specific areas? You would have comparatively few international students, for example, in an area such as philosophy, but many, many international students in an area such as engineering or computer science. What are the implications for planning, for enrollment management, for growth, for capacity in those units as we become more dependent on international enrollments? And finally, some very good news. The news was so good that we actually checked the figures how many times, Brian? 4 or 5 times to make sure they were right. Our year 1 to year 2 retention for undergraduates last year was about 79.5%. Right now, the data are showing that we're up to 85% now, a very, very large increase in retention. It can be attributed to a couple of factors. We have a higher proportion of our students who are going into high retention faculties, such as engineering, where the retention rates historically are higher than they are, say, in the Faculty of Arts, where you have a lot of students who are undecided, who haven't made up their minds, and who are therefore at a greater risk of loss. But also some of the retention efforts that are taking place in the faculty, things like supplemental learning and science, and there are programs of all kinds out in the faculties and in the departments, are clearly beginning to show some results. And finally, to be fair, I think we need to acknowledge that the labor market in Saskatchewan, with the unemployment rate going up right now, is encouraging people, greater numbers of people, to stay in school rather than leave and go and work in the oil patch or wherever. But greater retention is a good thing on the whole. I leave you just with this thought as you seek to advise us about enrollments and about tuition. Given that we're becoming more and more dependent on that revenue, how should we plan? What should our tuition strategy be? And what should we think about when we think about enrollments?
Good. Thanks, Tom. One quick note about enrollments with regard to graduate students. We're and have been on a steady incline for graduate student enrollment. We're probably up in terms of coursework graduate programs and slightly down on thesis-based programs, but overall our graduate enrollment is ever increasing, and that's good news, I think. Interesting bit of information. So the amount, with regard to tuition, the amount of tuition that we bring in, about a third of it is going back into scholarships and bursaries. And I think this is a very significant number of us reinvesting back into the campus. In Canada, we're only second to Memorial, and part of the rationale why we're second is Memorial's tuition is much lower than ours, and as a consequence, just the ratio kind of skews the data so that they are higher on this particular category than us. But the bottom line, I think it's important to see that we're reinvesting what we bring in terms of revenue. Student financial assistance has increased last year, 1.2 million for undergraduates, and important to note that we put 550,000 into graduate or doctoral student scholarship and funding. I know it's not enough, and we can always use more graduate funding, but we're certainly aware of this. I think in the past 3 years, we've increased graduate funding every year. I know we've got to do better. We've got to find more money for graduate students, but the trend is a positive one. Another good bit of information, though you probably may know this, that we are constantly seeking funding from other sources, and in particular, the Queen Elizabeth II Award. We've had this for 2 years, and already in the first 18 months, I suppose, we're halfway to meeting our target of 40 students. So this is a very prestigious award. It allows students to travel abroad to take a term at an international university, and great program, and so far so good. So, good.
One of the other things we wanted to speak about before we open it up for discussions about general priorities and things, in addition to tuition and scholarships, is deferred maintenance. And in part, first of all, you might think that this is just what used to be called sustaining capital, but now PMR, preventive maintenance and renewal funding, which we do get a special envelope from the government. It also is an operating budget issue, because we don't get enough from government. The amount that we receive now relative to what its peak was in terms of purchasing power is probably about 30% of what we were getting at one point, and even less than that in terms of what probably an appropriate level of funding would be. So we continue to argue to try and get more. And the good news is the government does recognize that, but the growth has been slow in the last couple of years. So it's not keeping up, so we have been moving some things into operating. Just to give you a sense of some of the things that the deferred maintenance, of course, you just have to read the Carillon, and it's doing a great job of advertising for us in terms of some of our key deferred maintenance. The leak of the week is exactly that. That's often deferred maintenance. It sits there, roof leaks and things like that, which we've been addressing in a big way. Many of those leak collectors hopefully are obsolete, but still being left there to try and, just in case the leak hasn't been caught, because they're expensive to take and reinstall. But a good example of deferred maintenance. As you can see in the second last bullet, we've done a number of roofs, very expensive, at about $1 million a pop for roofs 1 and 2 on the gym, and the Language Institute was $600,000. Those have all been done. A bunch of others, the big ones on the list there to come in the next short period of time, and of course lots of small repairs and things. So that's just one example of deferred maintenance. Some of the biggest stuff though is College Avenue campus, and of course if we get that fundraising project and other initiatives at College Avenue campus, that would tackle 25% of our deferred maintenance rate there. The lab building is another 15% of the deferred maintenance. So there's some older buildings that just need some general attention. On the operating budget side, because that's what we're going to talk about in the first bit of the discussion, is we've moved some of those expenses that used to be out of the PMR funding into the operating funding, in particular computer equipment. We found that was so important. It's a program that's well-liked. You can tell us whether you think it's still a high priority, because we're investing about $600,000 a year in it. And that's an evergreen project to take and replace computers and consoles and such on a regular basis. I think we're in a 4-year cycle for some components, a 5-year cycle for others. So it's now in the operating fund, the Evergreen program. We're also continuously seeking additional funding and have a huge project underway right now for relamping, of which total project we're getting almost $1 million from SAS Power for the IOEP fund. I forget exactly what it stands for, Industrial Energy Optimization Project. So IEOP. And so we'll be looking for that. Our second subject of discussion is what should we be targeting for the Strategic Investment Fund, an Infrastructure Canada initiative being done through Innovation Canada of $2 billion. I'll talk about that later on, but that will address some of these major ones. But we just wanted to open up the conversation about the operating side for now. So the question is, in terms of investments, to give you some general background, if you went through all of the different individual budget requests, which we have, and you mined out all of the requests for base funding and one-time funding, you come up, there's a list of initiatives, all of them great ideas, of $4.8 million in base funding is what the units have asked for, and $1.6 million in one time. Some of the things that have seemed to have been repeated in a number of different messaging and things like that, which is what we want to test here today, is what's your thoughts? Things like student mental health comes up. Library acquisitions has been discussed in many places. Areas of growth in different faculties. Of course, just about every faculty submission talks about places that they need to take and invest in good initiatives, some places that could generate revenue, others that are just plain good initiatives for students. Graduate student financial support, as Dave's already mentioned. Teaching equipment comes up regularly. It fits into that same sort of question in terms of evergreening. We evergreen a certain component of equipment, but other places maybe we aren't addressing enough. And IT systems in general. I think every unit on this campus has got a request in right now. There are 30 or 40 fantastic projects, generally efficiency projects that people said if we could take and do this in a more sophisticated way using computer technology, it would save the labor-intensive practice that we've got now. So every unit has got one. The ability of IS to keep up with those demands, we basically take and prioritize them. We're not getting them quickly enough. So there's lots of people telling us, okay, invest in some more project management capability for us and IS to take and advance these unit software initiatives. Deferred maintenance, although I just spoke about it, isn't up there, but some of the equipment related things are. So now we'd like to open the floor and get some feedback and things in terms of what are some of the priorities that we should be thinking of as we're preparing the budget.
So as people are thinking about coming up, just a reminder, if you could use one of the microphones so that those who are watching this by recording later on can hear you, and maybe just give your name and the unit you're in so that people know who you are. And to Dave's point there, that's new requests, that's new money that's being asked for, 4.8 million base. So if we staff a new position, that becomes a permanent expense. It's got to be base budgeted. So nearly 5 million in asks for new base budgeted expenses, but that's on top of the growth in the cost of the existing complement of faculty and staff. So that is not included in that amount. And just to help you frame this, as we're struggling with this, we asked for about a 4.8%, 4.4% on the grant. Given the fiscal condition of the province, we would be very surprised to see 1% on the grant, and each percent on the grant is about $1 million. If we get 0% on the grant, we get no grant increase. We get the same one we got last year. And earlier you saw every percentage of tuition we put up gains us about another $700,000. So in order to get an additional 4.8 on tuition, the quick math is that we would have to raise tuition by 7% on average to gain that amount. So that's just helping to frame some of the struggles we're going through as we look at potential expenditures against what looks to be our revenue streams.
Any questions or thoughts? It could be either one of them, just comments,
Solutions?
challenges,
Philanthropists.
or if not, Peter, please.
I apologize because I've missed all of these until now. I apologize because I've missed all of these until now, so my comments may be redundant with what's been said before. I guess my first thought was, given that we're probably going to get nothing or close to it, I wouldn't start anything new. And instead, I would look for issues that were related to structural problems at the university that would cascade into the future. That is, things that we have to do right that we know we're not doing right at this time. And while there's nothing on that list that anybody would say, oh, that's a waste of money, maybe none of them need to be done, and the money needs to be reinvested into the base operations in the university to make sure that what we already do, we do better rather than sort of disperse ourselves more. The second piece related to tuition, and this is going to sound horrible, but we probably should do I'm sure you've done this, an analysis of where we should raise the tuition to maximum benefit. You know, raising the tuition on units which have more external or international students will generate far more money than raising the tuition, say, in fine arts. So there's probably a cost-benefit analysis. Who are we going to put off coming to the university by raising the tuition versus how much are we going to gain if 5% or 10% more? And if you're getting 3 times as much revenue per capita from international students, then that's probably your low-hanging fruit, whether we like that or not.
I'll try to respond quickly to the tuition issue, Peter. It's a good point. It is a harsh one, and it's being done all the time. One of the things that we need to do is remain roughly competitive with the schools with which we compete for these students, the local schools. We can't get too far out of line with them. And the other thing we all want to bear in mind with tuition revenue is that the farther away you get from the home base, the more fragile that revenue becomes. So if we're recruiting, say, many students from, I'll make one up, Uzbekistan, and we become very dependent on tuition revenue from Uzbekistani students, and all of a sudden the Uzbekistan government collapses and ceases financing its students, we can, within the space of 3 weeks, find ourselves out of $1 million or $2 million in base revenue, and we've built base expenses counting on that revenue, which we can no longer afford. So that's part of the kind of the realpolitik of that.
And I'll maybe comment on the first point in terms of investing in investments when you don't have enough money to take and keep the core operation going. A very valid point. And I think every year, and in some of the previous slides, as you mentioned, we did put a nominal amount in there of $1 million of reinvestments, which just drives the net challenge in terms of cuts in other places up by $1 million. So if you invest in $1 million new, then that means $1 million of cuts someplace else to be able to take and achieve that. And so the general comment about priority would be, I'd interpret that to preference to less cuts than more investments and things, which is definitely a consideration.
Maybe I'll add one more thing to that. In thinking this through, I'll use an example that you've heard before. We invested several years ago in a brand new program, the Master's in Health Administration in the Public Policy School. That has doubled its expected enrollment. So it's not only way ahead of its business plan, it's actually contributing back to the university, giving us revenue and giving the school revenue to do other things. That revenue would not have been available without that investment. It's a bit of a gamble when you do that. We're talking about the Health Information Management Program in science. If we were to go down that path, we're making a further request to government for funding for that. There are obviously some startup costs that we would need funded. The hope would be that down the road, that would actually then become a net contributor and would help fund programs in areas like biology and physics and so on. But we don't know that.
Okay, so just a couple of responses. The first one to your point about the sort of differential tuition. I guess I was thinking of more along the lines of there was no point in putting up philosophy tuition 5% because it wasn't going to generate enough revenue as 1% in applied science and engineering. Whether we like it or not, that I assume is just the straight numbers of it. So it wasn't so much punishing or disadvantaging units, just that I think a differential application of tuition increases is probably going to have to happen with the eye to generating the maximum revenue. I've forgotten my second point.
Again, very...
Judy and then Assam? Or Assam, did you want to immediately respond to that? Judy, do you mind?
Just when Assam's getting up, Peter, a very quick one. We did do a differential increase for engineering and business a couple of years ago, with the result that students who are registered, let us say in the Faculty of Business Administration, but who are taking English 100 as part of their program, pay more for English 100 than the person in the Faculty of Arts, which causes other problems.
Sam Hussein, Dean of Engineering. We actually have done that a couple of years ago. We increased the tuition fees for our course-based Master of Engineering in a way to control enrollment, and of course, as expected, the enrollment went up. Further, we revamped the program to be a professional engineering program and provide engineering skills, practice skills, and it's generating extra revenues, helping us with the increased enrollment in at the undergraduate level. I looked at increasing the tuition fees for bachelor, undergrad, as a way again to controlling enrollment. And to my amazement, our tuition fees were already higher than the neighboring schools. So I just couldn't do it. But we've done that.
And Assam, your students had voted independently to increase their own program fees, did they not?
For reminding me of this. We had an equipment fund. Students donate money to help us purchase new equipment. Students, on their own, I embarrassed them because the fund was introduced in 1999. So I said, calculate the inflation. They doubled in their own the contribution. Not only that, I was very impressed. They've taken 25% of the increased enrollment to invest in the future so that future engineering students don't have to pay in that fund. We were also lucky in getting equipment, money for equipment, donations by an oil company, even though the oil industry is not doing well. So all these increased sources of funding are being considered. I'd like to brag that we raise about 13% of our operating budget from other sources. We're doing as much as we could.
If I can tie in one of the questions from the last presentation of the forum to exactly that one, because it's such a good one. The fact that here we've got students voluntarily self-contributing extra money to help address some of our infrastructure, deferred maintenance equipment problems. That money, because one of the questions last time is where's all of this surplus that's in special purpose funds? Well, one of the special purpose funds is or a few of them are engineering student funds that are collected so that they can actually then take, and the faculty then picks what piece of equipment they're going to take and upgrade and buy. And in the interim, it sits as one of those 400 special purpose funds that we just administered, but all the decisions are made by the students and the faculty. Judy, and then Mark? Or Judy did... Thanks, Mark.
I wanted to really comment on the student mental health services that, earlier in the slides, you talked about student retention issues. And there are lots of reasons why I think we've been doing a better job of student retention issues. It's the advising and all of the supports that we're putting in place. But most of us who are working with students are hearing more about the mental health issues, and we're also hearing about not just about some very severe, difficult situations that are coming up, and we don't have I'm not sure how many folks are working within that sector, but I know there's Kent, so we don't have a lot of resources in that area. I just want to flag that you can't have one or two persons doing this kind of work for a university, especially when we are also saying that this university is serving the province. So for instance, in social work, it's a provincial program. So if we're thinking student retention, we have to talk about mental health services. The other thing related to that is if we're also talking about expansion and recruitment, and we're talking about it in a context where there's unemployment, folks are coming back to school because there are no jobs, there's a whole bunch of issues out there which also contribute to mental well-being. So I think we have a responsibility to put something in place. I think what we have right now is inadequate, and I don't think we want to wait until there's some huge crisis, whether it is somebody committing suicide or somebody killing somebody or something else. And we're just very lucky in this, at this university that we haven't had a huge problem yet, a huge crisis. So I'm just a little concerned that it isn't something we can say, well, let's put that aside. It's something we need to deal with now.
Thank you for that. We're all concerned. John Smith is here, and he can speak to it in a little bit more detail if he chooses to do so. We do have a wonderful team. Kent Klippenstein and the very few people around him provide wonderful service to students who are in real difficulty, but we do not have nearly enough staff in that area for the student body that we now have. And Judy has pointed out, of course, that we have the better part of 1,000 students in Saskatoon who are underserved for things like student mental health, but elsewhere as well. So for us in the budgeting question, if you've got $100 and $480 worth of requests, and one of those $480 worth of requests is another student counselor, do you choose that over a faculty position somewhere or over an IT specialist who is hired to contend with the increasing hacking attempts on the network that all universities, including this one, are experiencing? It's a question of many, many good competing requests and insufficient resources. But your point about our responsibility to the well-being of students is heard and well taken.
Mark?
I'm going to ask whether you have some data. You talk about 50% of students leave with debt versus 50% not. About how many of our students who leave are eligible for all of the provincial grants post-graduation that actually reap a whole lot of rewards that, frankly, people aren't told about particularly well? I mean, yes, they may leave with debt, but they get a lot of that back.
This is true. And what Mark's referring to is the provincial program whereby if you stay and live in the province, it's been changed slightly in the last budget, but basically if you stay, live, work, file an income tax return in Saskatchewan, and take advantage of all of the tax credits for a period of 7 years, someone will correct me if I'm wrong, the net cost of your undergraduate degree in arts is about $340. But for students, it's now that counts. They're paying now, they're working 30 hours a week now to try to pay that tuition bill. 7 years down the road is kind of meaningless. So Mark, though it is a good and generous program, it doesn't help the students who are truly in need now as much as we would like to do, and it's one of the reasons we've increased the amount of financial support we're making available to students who are truly in need. My impression, and again, Brian is really in command of these figures, when we say that CUSC survey shows that 50% of our graduating population leave without debt, that is in the now. These are people who are largely supported by parents or family and who are, I presume, living at home, many of them, and don't build up that tremendous expense base that somebody coming in, paying for residence, paying for a food plan, paying for tuition, paying for a car, and putting it largely into debt would have on graduation. Did you want to go to the microphone, Brian, so people can hear you? More deferred maintenance.
No food or drink in the auditorium.
We're just about to embark on a new graduate follow-up survey, so the data is a little bit out of date. But as I recall it, well over 80% of graduates, both undergraduate and graduate students, remain in the province after graduation. So most of them, if they're earning an income under the new requirements, will be able to claim that graduate retention program funding.
Thank you.
Thanks. If there's a lull in the questions, we can come back to the anything about operating. Oh, Brian's got a question. Okay.
I'd just like to introduce a slight variation on this topic, and we've just completed some analysis in my office, which produces some very intriguing results. What we did was we assumed that we had $1 million to spend. Some philanthropist agreed to provide us $1 million a year in operating funding in perpetuity. And we put that money into a faculty that is research intensive, graduate student intensive, and so on, and just assumed that we could hire new faculty with that money, about 7 new faculty. They taught the average number of graduate students, supervised them that the current faculty and that faculty do. They were as research productive in terms of research expenditures and granting council funding as the current complement of tenured faculty in that faculty do, and a variety of other assumptions. Those are the major ones. Ran that data through the funding formula model and discovered that essentially that would generate about $1.2 million in additional operating grant, plus some additional tuition revenue and indirect costs of research support fund money. So essentially, that pays for itself. Assuming we could find a faculty where we have additional capacity in terms of space and facilities and so on, and that could find new faculty who would be as research productive as the current faculty, that sort of investment pays for itself. Now, it does take time for that operating grant money to ramp up. Unfortunately, about 7 or 8 years. But it's really an intriguing finding that you can actually leverage our sources of revenue. By spending more money, we actually get even more money. And that sort of, if we could find the money, that really would change our notions about investment and reinvestment.
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, Brian. Peter?
Sorry, this has been my last comment. So I spent 3 years on a board of a U.S. society, which is having a membership issue, not unlike a tuition enrollment issue. And we hired a consultant to understand the dynamics, which is basically why people didn't participate in this national level society, not unlike why people don't come to the University of Regina or do come to the University of Regina. And as part of it, we had to read this book, Race for Relevance, which I would recommend. It's a long night's read, but that's about it. And the gist of it was, there were sort of 5 points, and I'll outline the ones I can remember off the top of my head and just suggest that at least some of this might be useful for the planning exercise. The first thing that they pointed out that most organizations that were in trouble were top heavy. And they pointed out that things like Microsoft actually have an executive of 3 that make all the decisions, and that most efficient groups work more or less the same way. So they suggested looking at things like board structure and looking at things about the distribution of resources and who actually makes decisions and simplifying a little bit. The second thing was those positions then had to be staffed based on skills, not representation or regionality or anything like that. Like, we don't need somebody from Western Canada because they're from Western Canada. We need that person because they're good at this, or this person because they're good at that. The third piece, and this is the key one I think for us, is identification of the core activities, the things that you absolutely must do because that's what your members want as part of the society. In this particular society, it was publications and annual meetings. That's what they wanted, and everything from daycare to everything else was peripheral. If those 2 were good, a lot of people were happy. And so how do you decide that? And the way that the consultant suggested was you make a list of everything that you do, and then you're forced to rank them. Let's say there's 20 activities that require funding. You have to assign them 1 through 20 with no ties. You have to assign them. Usually the top ones are easy, the bottom ones are fairly easy, and then there's a whole mess in the middle that you can't decide on. And the sequence actually doesn't matter that much. You simply then take your budget appropriately and distribute it according to those activities. There are some things we have to have power. That's not a question here. So some sort of forced ranking where you're not allowed to say it would be nice about this, that, or the other thing, but you must give it a number and figure out where it lies in your priorities. And then once you've decided that, you resource those activities.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Peter.
Are there any other comments or questions? We really want to hear from you. What your suggestions
I'll
are.
maybe switch to the next one while people are maybe thinking, because it might stimulate some more thought as well. The Federal Infrastructure Program, called the Strategic Investment Fund through Innovation Canada, a 3-year program. All the work has to be done. I don't know if we have it up there, but by May of 2018. Is that the end of it? Okay, end of April 2018. And $2 billion. It's very, very similar to the KIP program that we did a number of years ago. We got 19, to give you a sense of scale, we got $19 million out of that. Actually, 8.5 of it was federal. The other bit was levered 50% matching from the province, and others that we had to top up in a couple of different places. So this is being structured almost identical to it. We just got 2 different letters today of information, actually an email just moments ago with some guidelines from the province. I still haven't had a chance to read it, but a letter from the federal government saying that our matching partners can come in later because we may not even have a budget produced, well, we won't have a budget produced by the time the due date of 9th of May, which is only a few weeks away from now. So they're saying, okay, you can leave where the matching funding might be coming from, and then that will come later. We still have to work through the province, etc., but we need to come up with some ideas of projects that we're going to take and do. So some of the things you've been able to read up there in terms of what they're targeting, basically innovation, commercialization, sustainability, and of course, research and things which of course they describe in the broadest of ways. So here's a list of some projects that we've already thought of in a couple different ways, because we've either submitted them in past projects, like KIP projects that weren't funded, or capital projects that we've had on the books for quite some time, or initiatives, of course, like the first one, our College Avenue campus, which has been our #1 priority fundraising initiative for years, and is very much fits into some of the categories, and each of them fit in different ways. So we're looking for some input on this as well. And this is something we're going to have to be putting together over the next probably 10 days or so. So if you had thoughts once you leave here, feel free to email them to us as well. But College Avenue campus is one of them. We've got that pretty well designed. Another element is virtually shovel ready. So these are projects that are, they can't just be conceived today and then be going. They've got to pretty well be almost design ready. The lab building renewal phase 2, as you may recall, we got $6 million to do phase 1, where we excavated the basement out and prepared to what I call turning that building inside out. So the all of those old fan units and things like that that exhaust upwards, to be able to keep the building in operation, but put in all new fan systems that are basically in the basement, and take and upgrade that building in another phase. This other $6 million or so, if we did for this one, wouldn't do all of it, but it would get it going. So things like mechanical and ventilation in there for all the fume hoods, of course fire systems, there's lots in the lab building that needs to be done. So it's one that we're thinking of. Thinking of bundling a variety of, say, $3 million worth of elevators, a similar amount for roofs, and some for HVAC systems in other buildings, not the least of which is another one of our very old buildings, the old PAS, or the old part of Center for Kinesiology, Health and Sport, which needs to be upgraded. So a major project there. Looking at classroom technology upgrades. So taking and improving the technology and basically what we, in the simplest of terms, call smart classrooms. With Congress coming in 2018 and us having to have every classroom operating at its best at that time, that would be an opportune project. And of course, the data center, sort of the core of our research and our administrative systems and things like that, need to keep that running. And some exciting things like getting rid of asbestos that's in there, et cetera, and improving the systems and things is another one. And there could be more. So we throw that question out there as well in terms of if we've got this one-time opportunity funds, is there something that we're missing? If not, we'll probably prioritize amongst these somehow and we'll mainly to get some steering from the cues and interests of the province once they layer on their interests on the federal program. So any thoughts on this or back to the operating budget? Mark?
Do you think the feds will prioritize by how many jobs are created in terms of giving out money? I mean, the last two are going to be is sort of buying technology more than creating jobs.
They haven't signaled that, but when you finally see the forms and things like that, of course, typical bureaucrats and things, there'll be lots of forms. I'm quite certain that that's one of the things is job creation numbers. But from the construction side, which most of these relate to construction activity, there's probably not a big difference between or amongst them.
So do people have any thoughts about these lists? Everything from student mental health through library acquisitions to asbestos removal in a data center. And what should we do in the context of the challenges we face, or challenges our students face around tuition costs? What do you think?
And while you're thinking of those, we may be back to you. Some of the best stories of what the innovations are or what the needs are and things like that come from you. Nelson and his team can't sort of invent these, and just like a good grant submission, because that's essentially what they are. We need to sell these projects, and so the ideas that you have will help us sell these projects for you, whether it's a simple mechanical project that you don't think relates to you, well, some of the innovative needs and things like that you've got in your operation. So say in the lab building, we'll definitely be talking to the folks in science to help craft some of the needs and the words of what to hopefully get that one to sell even better. And conversely for other ones.
I'm sorry. How crazy ideas do you want?
Fire away.
Yeah.
Well, so looking at what's there in terms of enhancing and modernizing research and commercialization, then the second piece about an environmental or greenhouse gas footprint, we're in a province that burns coal to make power. If we can get off that grid, we're automatically national leaders in sustainability and greenhouse gas emissions. So if you really want to go big, is there a scenario with the geothermal heating of the campus? Is there a scenario with greening all the roofs? I mean, it's not going to be chump change to do this, but this is the sort of thing that in a long-term footprint in terms of not only just achieving these goals, but basically saving us money, not having to buy coal-fired fuel. And I could see that going better with the province than going back to the province yet again for College Avenue, which I know it's hearsay, but my understanding is the province isn't super thrilled about those requests. I wouldn't use this to go back for something that we're getting sort of not that interested from the province already.
I think those are great. There's any of those ideas might stimulate some thought and some good projects and things like that. One of the challenges we'd have to submit by the 9th of May would be able to really understand some of those things. Having worked the geothermal one, and of course when I first came to this university, the well was still there. And some of the memories and the active research of the researchers in science, some of you folks might, who
Larry Vigrass in geology.
yeah. And so it would be great if we could get ahead of that and actually have some, get some research done first to be able to then actually turn it into a facilities project. Right now, I know the facilities folks struggle in terms of just not knowing what the capabilities and things like that are to be able to turn it into a project right away. But those are good. And those are ones knowing that this will probably come about in another few years. And I look about being prepared, because that's a good example. If we could, we're probably not prepared for this one to do something like geothermal, but you think back to before the KIP program and we had this empty fifth floor of the RIC building and talk about preparation, we could turn that around quick, and we got $6 million to take and fit up another half of the that fifth floor of the RIC building because there was some forethought. So I think I'd even encourage us to take that thought back and prepare for a project a couple of years from now is one idea.
Conversation I had with Lloyd Barber, he was still pounding away at the geothermal.
So Peter, just
interesting to bring it up.
on College Avenue, it is, it's obviously going to be a long haul. One of the things there we struggle with is, I mean, hypothetically, if we said, let's forget that, which isn't going to happen, we have a considerable number of staff there for whom we have no quarters on the main campus. The plan is also eventually to move the public policy school up there, and they're currently in expensive rented space. So if we don't have a long-term solution for the public policy school, we're going to continue to pay pretty expensive rent across the street in Innovation Place for them indefinitely. So we have pressing needs for staff who are located there, who are running most of the Center for Continuing Education, the distance education operation, the online operation, all of that stuff. We have no place for those people if we don't fix College Avenue. So that's just one other element that we have to contend with in our thinking.
Hey, one of the things, if I can just expand on College Avenue campus, and sorry, Sam, but one of the benefits we've got is in terms of matching money and things like that. We can not only offer the feds in the province a smaller share, but because we've got fundraising partners already in terms of some significant millions of dollars there, and even some of our own initiatives. So it makes for an attractive levering of money from the government perspective of projects like that, which would probably be important too.
Sam Hussein here again. I would like to add to that list bringing our researchers back to campus from the Innovation Place, particularly the petroleum people. We have overcrowded labs, huge liability, and it will be nice if that can be included in our infrastructure proposal. I know it's very likely leaning to renovation, but this is a critical infrastructure.
I can tell you our minds were in that same vein. We had submitted a list in preparation for this so that Universities Canada could take and lobby the government, which I think has been successful, to get this $2 billion program. They asked us for a list of projects, which we had all of these, plus a few others that were big. So we had a $50 million, what do we call it, professional building, basically engineering building and others, in addition to the education building for the units that are bursting at the seams there for $50 million. We just, doing some research around KIP, which this is mirrored around KIP, there is no, the largest project that was ever funded through KIP on the federal government perspective was $14 million. And so that won't, we can't stretch that into a building. So we're thinking, that's one of the questions, if you've got some advice, we're thinking strategically ones that big that aren't shovel ready, and if it can't be delivered by April of 2018, then we don't have a chance of winning with that one, and otherwise it would be on the list and things, because that is one area of need as well.
Can bring them into the lab building.
Darren.
Darren Schwati, Human Resources. The priority list, appreciating we've got to get through our 16-17 fiscal, may I suggest, and Dr. Chase, I've heard you say this often in the sense of preparing our university for success longer than the next year, looking at a 3 to 5 year cycle, particularly looking at the demographics of what's happening in Saskatchewan, what's coming as far as the, what's coming out of our high schools and looking at being competitive. Would you be asking us to look at that priority list in the context of how we set up our university for success over the long term, not just the next year?
Very much so. Very much so. Universities live in decade, if not century-long cycles, and of course some of the best-known universities in the world are centuries old and have been successful because they think in the long term. But if we try to make the decisions that we make now for the student body we think we are going to encounter for the next 5 to 10 years, we will probably make better decisions than we do in trying to address immediate and perhaps pressing needs, but needs that aren't necessarily long-term.
And maybe your last comment is perhaps a segue into my next question. How creative, and I guess I can only refer to it in human resources as exit interviews for folks who decide to leave the university, understanding what they enjoyed and what they didn't. How innovative and creative have we been with our current student body in the context of their priority list and what they would like to see or what they think the U of R should be, in essence, to attract that next generation of students?
That's a really good question. Asking departing students, what do we need to do to make this a better place for their younger siblings? That's a fantastic question. Our levels of student satisfaction are relatively pleasing, though it is a strategic goal of ours to drive those up even higher. And one way of doing that would be to get information from those students leaving about what they think needs to be done, again, for their younger brothers and sisters. That's a great suggestion. Thank you.
Just aware of the time, I think 4 o'clock was the target. I don't want to get into other people's crossing schedules and things. Any last minute questions? If not.
Thank you.
There we go.
We had planned the next, I'm sorry, Dave, this is you, isn't it?
Is it me? You go right ahead.
We're not well rehearsed, unlike the Dark Hall 5.
Yes, of course.
We had planned the next budget forum for, I think it was the 19th of May. Kim, correct me if I'm wrong. We've decided we can't do that. It doesn't make any sense to do that until we know what the allocation from the province is going to be. So what we're going to do, as soon as we've got a budget date, we'll set the date of the 4th forum and invite you to that, because by then we'll know what is the single largest number that is important to us on the revenue side, and that is the annual operating grant. And as you know, everything, including all of the gripping videos of these presentations, are all up on that page. All of the documents are there. The budget book is there. The annual reports are there. Everything that you could dream of, we hope, is on that page. If there's anything lacking on that page, please let us know. And please give us your advice at the simple email address budget@uregina.ca. We really seek and value the input that you give us on these difficult questions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.